Maggie, and thank you everyone for joining us today. It's nice to see this turnout, and I'd like to wish you all a happy Chinese New Year. It is the year of the ox. And I also like to thank the organizers for inviting me. I'm really excited for this session, and this has been put together in recognition of the International Day of Women and Girls in Science. I am a daughter of immigrants to Canada, and I happen to be the Division Director of Cardiology at the University of Toronto. And these sessions are very important to me in a specialty that would be hugely benefited by having some more women. We're only about 20% in our subspecialty. So I hope we see these talks, these stories as inspiration to us and why change is going to be good for everyone. So we have two speakers who are going to share their experiences in academic medicine to speak to the challenges that women face in scholarship and recognize women leaders in our academic community. There will be, so we're going to have the two speakers speak first, then we'll have a Q&A session. I'll try to monitor the chat though for questions that accumulate. So don't hesitate to enter a question in the chat as the talks are going along. It's my great pleasure to introduce the first speaker, who's Dr. Moira Capral, somebody who I've known and admired for many, many years. Though that does make us sound old, Moira, sorry about that. Dr. Capral is my colleague, and she is the Division Director of General Internal Medicine. She's on staff in the Division of General Internal Medicine at the UHN. She holds the Lillian Love Chair in Women's Health. She is a superb scientist, and her research program has been focused on stroke in women, but other populations at risk as well. She's published over 200 papers and holds over $20 million in funding. And it just gives me such great pleasure to introduce her. And she's going to tell us a little bit about navigating the research academic system, and her talk is entitled Advancing Women in Academic Medicine. So thank you, Moira, for joining us.
Thank you for that very kind introduction, Susanna, and thank you everyone for attending. And I do not have any disclosures. And over the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to provide some information on the state of women in academic medicine, talk about some of the systemic factors that drive this, and then spend some time discussing potential interventions that can be done both at the institution level, but also things that all of us as individuals can do. So this is data from the United States. It's fairly recent, 2018 to 2019, on the representation of women in academic medicine. And what you can see is that women now make up more than 50% of medical school applicants, but there is attrition as one goes through the ranks, with only 40% of faculty being women, 25% of full professors, and 18% of deans and chairs. And you might look at this and say, well, this is because women haven't made up that many women in medical school for that long. But in fact, since the 1990s, so more than 30 years, women have made up 40% of medical school applicants. This is Canadian data looking at women in research positions in general. And now bachelor students make up well over 50% women. But again, moving through the ranks, there are only 21% full-time professors and only 17% of Tier 1 Canada research chairs. And if you're a woman of color, it's even worse. Of all of the professors in the United States, under 1% are Black or African American women. And not only do women face underrepresentation and delays in progressing through the ranks, but there's also a gender pay gap. And this is Canadian data looking at women in research. And in life sciences in particular, for every dollar a man makes, women made just over 85 cents. And you might think, well, maybe this is because they have different job descriptions, different ranks, different work. This is a nice study from a Dr. Reshma Jagsi, who's done a lot of really important work in this area. And she studied a very circumscribed group of young physician researchers, so quite homogeneous in terms of their baseline variables, and found even in this group of researchers, there was over a 30% difference in $30,000 per year difference in salary. And even after adjustment for all of the things you might think would explain this, like age and specialty and leadership positions and publications and work hours, there was still a significant difference. This group of researchers attempted to look a little bit more at the potential reasons for differences in funding and look specifically at the ability to obtain research support. And this study looked at very highly qualified, high potential early career scientists. And these were people who received K awards from the National Institutes of Health, which are very competitive and given to very promising early career faculty. And then looked to see how successful these early career people were at obtaining independent funding or an R01 award from the NIH, and found that men were significantly more likely to obtain funding than women. And this was true even after adjustment for things like institution tier and specialty and the type and year of the K award. And there have been quite a few studies that have documented similar differences in the ability of women and men to obtain grant funding. And a nice recent study from Canada looked into some of the reasons behind this. You've probably seen this study. It received a lot of attention when it came out last year, but the investigators took advantage of a natural experiment when CIHR changed its traditional grant program to one that was divided into a focus on the project grant, so looking at the project, not specifically on the scientist, and the foundation grant program, which included an explicit review and a focus on the scientists. And what they found was that in the traditional and project grants, men and women had pretty much the same likelihood of success in grant funding, but when it came to the foundation grants, women were much less likely to be successful. And the authors concluded that gender gaps in grant funding are attributable to less favorable assessments of women as principal investigators, not of the quality of their proposed research. A gender gap in authorship in the medical literature has also been documented. This is a study looking at the major US specialty journals in internal medicine, surgery, pediatrics, and so on, finding that under 30% of first authors were women and under 20% of senior authors are women. And women are also underrepresented on editorial boards. This has been seen for many years, and this is a study that just came out this year, and still only 20% of editors-in-chief are women. So as you can see, women face underrepresentation and less salary, fewer opportunities on editorial boards, and less research funding. And so the question is, why does this happen? And I don't have time to go through all of the evidence behind this, but I'll just make the point that it's not a pipeline issue. We know that there are 50% women coming into medical school, and it's not because women aren't as talented and not because they're as interested, not because they're less interested in achieving these things. It has to do in part to systemic things, including unconscious bias, gendered societal roles, and harassment. And I'll talk about each of these things in a little bit more detail. So unconscious bias, I'm sure you're familiar with this, but this is the implicit attitudes, stereotypes, and assumptions that occur without one's knowledge or intention, where the brains essentially make positive or negative associations about certain groups of people. And it happens unconsciously, which means that so-called good people who consciously hold very egalitarian views can unknowingly discriminate. And everyone is susceptible. It's not that men are biased against women, everyone is biased. And if any of you have taken the implicit bias testing, you'll see how biased you are. And biases can occur in all kinds of directions, but in general, they do tend to disadvantage women. And here's an example from the science world. This is an experiment where faculty were provided with undergraduate applications for a lab manager position. And the exact same materials were randomly assigned the name of a male or a female student and provided to the faculty, who were then asked to rate the candidates on how competent they were, how likely they were to hire them and mentor them. And in all areas, they rated the male students more highly despite having the exact same application materials. And this is not unique to medicine. This is sadly something that has been seen pretty much universally. This is an example from the venture capital world where an experiment was done related to pitches for startup funds. And again, an identical proposal was prepared with a slide deck and a script, and people weren't seen. It was just a voice, and it was narrated by either a male or a female voice. And as you're probably not surprised to see at this point, 68% favored the pitches narrated by the male voice. Then a bit about gendered societal roles and how these affect women's productivity and success in academic medicine. This is a study looking at University of California faculty and looking at the amount of work they spent each week on professional activities, housework, and caregiving. And you can see that for people without children, men and women spent about the same amount of time on all of these activities. But for people with children, women spent substantially more time on housework and caregiving compared to men. And again, you might say that there might be differences based on the type of faculty and the work that they were doing. And so this is a study looking specifically at young physician researchers who had very similar job descriptions. And again, among married respondents with children, women were much more likely to be the person to take time off in the event of disruption of usual childcare arrangements. So a sick child or a nanny not able to work. And women spent an average of 8.5 more hours per week on domestic activities. And you could imagine, if you're a researcher, how much more time you could spend writing papers or writing grants if you had an extra 8.5 hours a week. And we've all seen how during the COVID-19 pandemic, this has had a disproportionate effect on female academics related to school closures and lack of domestic support. And then a little bit about sexual harassment. And not only does this have an effect on mental health and physical health, as you might expect, but it also affects job-related outcomes. So things like job satisfaction, whether or not people withdraw from an organization, and productivity and performance. And it turns out that in the area of academic science, sexual harassment is very common in medicine, and women are substantially more likely to report this compared to men. So that's a brief overview of some of the problems. There's a lot more on this, but that's just an overview. Now a bit about what we can do. And I'll start at the institutional level. And many of these recommendations come from this really excellent report from the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. And the first one is to hold funders and institutions accountable for adopting practices to address gender disparities. And what does that actually mean? Here are some concrete examples. The Dimensions, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Charter from Canada recognizes institutions that have a commitment to advancing careers of women in STEM, and institutional participation is encouraged by all of the major granting organizations, and I'm happy to say that UHN is a signatory to this charter. Another example is the Athena Swan Charter. This is in the UK, and all academic departments who apply for funding from the major UK research organization must hold the Athena Swan Silver Award. And then another example is the Canada Research Chair's EDI Action Plan, where specific targets are recommended and set. And here you can see for the University of Toronto targets, a target percentage of women and other underrepresented groups has been set. And you can see how well we are doing, in fact, very well in terms of meeting these targets. Second recommendation for organizations is to use data to drive improvement. So if you don't know how many women or other represented groups work at your organization, and if you don't know how they're faring, then you can't fix things. And so the first recommendation here is to annually collect data, at least on basic demographics, to know how many faculty and trainees you have from different groups, and then supplement this with qualitative survey data to find out what the work climate is like, and then use that information to identify shortcomings in recruitment, retention, or advancement, and use that information to implement interventions, circle back, collect data again, see if these worked, and if they did work, formalize them within institutional practices so that they continue happening even if there's a leadership change, for example. Next recommendation, again for organizations, is to improve recruitment. And one of the most important things everyone can do is work continuously to identify promising candidates from underrepresented groups. I can't overemphasize the importance of actually looking for people who would be good candidates and reaching out to them and suggesting that they apply for things. There are many great people who won't apply because they don't feel worthy or they don't think about it, but if you target them, they will apply. Reducing bias in recruitment is enhanced by having formal searches for job postings, having a diverse search committee so people don't just replicate themselves, having implicit bias training for search committee members, and using structured interviews and standardized questions. And all of this is currently done at the Department of Medicine and is variably done in other groups. Organizations should look for ways to improve retention, and one of these is focusing on pay equity and fair access to other resources. So when people are being hired, there should be standard packages in terms of startup pay and administrative resources. There should be standard and transparent criteria for promotion and compensation, and then set standards of behavior, including sanctions for incivility and harassment. We should increase the pool of female leaders because you can't be what you can't see. And part of this is the employment and promotion of more women, and also maybe considering term limits for senior leaders to provide more opportunities for women. Organizations should also look for ways to promote work-life integration. So recognize that parenting and motherhood in particular is a fact of life. It's going to happen. So create policies that don't penalize people, have stop the clock or modified duties, parental leave for both men and for women, have facilities for nursing women, and limit meetings to specified working hours. It's also important for organizations to recognize and resource equity, diversity, and inclusion activities. All of this work, sitting on committees, doing surveys, promoting EDI work is important, but often the people doing this work are the people from underrepresented groups, and they're doing this on top of the regular academic activities. And they're happy to do it because it's important and valuable work, but it comes at a cost. They could be writing grants or papers instead. So where appropriate, there should be financial compensation for this work. There should be adequate administrative and other supports. Ideally, universities should look for ways to formally recognize this work for promotions, and professional societies should look to create awards and honors to recognize this work so it can be used for academic advancement. And now a few things that we can do as individuals as well as organizations. And one of these is improving mentorship and coaching. So mentorship is coaching with the goal of personal growth. And sponsorship is a bit different. It's the use of power and influence to advocate for an individual. So an example of this would be advocating for one of your trainees to present at a national meeting, or advocating for an early career faculty member to get a position on an editorial board. And it takes a certain amount of power and influence to start with to be able to serve as an effective sponsor. And so men in leadership positions, because there are more of them, should recognize that they have the ability to sponsor women and should look for opportunities to do so when appropriate. In terms of specifics here, early career women really need sponsorship and mentorship around obtaining research funding, because we know that success begets success. And so if you start off not getting grants, then you're much less likely to get future grants, and then it's a bad snowball effect. Mid-career women need robust letters of recommendation. They need speaking opportunities that position them as subject matter experts, and they need amplification of their work so that people will see what they're doing and consider them for future speaking opportunities and collaborations. We should all look for ways to increase representation of women. So if you're organizing rounds and seminars and panels and so on, look at who you're inviting and make sure that there's representation of women and other underrepresented groups. And some specific examples of things that people have done, strategies people can adopt. This is an example from the Neurology Journal, which last year published this editorial stating their commitment to address gender bias, and they have set targets for increasing their representation on editorial boards and mastheads. And they're starting with women, but they plan to implement similar policies for other underrepresented groups. Another example for preventing all male panels or manels, many men are now declining to participate in all male panels. For example, in fact, the head of the NIH has pledged that he will not speak at conferences if there aren't enough women in prominent speaking roles. Women need to accept speaking invitations. I know personally I hate doing media, but I recognize I'm part of the problem when I don't agree to do these things. And everyone, if you're on a committee that is seeking participants, identify the issue early and be prepared to suggest female speakers. And then the last recommendation is to write better reference letters. So this is a study, you're probably familiar with this, that looked at reference letters for early career faculty and found that women compared to men were much more likely to be described with so-called grindstone adjectives. So hardworking, conscientious, dependable, or with doubt raisers, so negative language or unexplained comments and faint praise, whereas men were much more likely to be described with multiple mentions of their research, as well as standout adjectives like excellent and outstanding. And so based on this, the University of Arizona has created this excellent tip sheet, which is available online, about how to write excellent reference letters for women as well as for men. So just a few final comments. You've seen that there are many gaps and barriers for women. I haven't even presented all of them. There have been substantial improvements over time, but very, very slowly, like really over the past 20 years, lots of improvements, but we're still not nearly there. And it's important to note that the benefits to date have mainly been accrued in white women. But I do think that maybe finally we're reaching a time where things are going to change. There does seem to be a certain amount of momentum and investment from institutions and people. And so maybe we're finally reaching the time when things will change. And I'm going to end there, but I'll direct you to these excellent resources, again, all freely available online, that have a lot of information, both on the nature of the problem and interventions that people can do to address it. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Moira, very much. And very, as always, succinctly presented with full of data, and it directly addresses the issues, and as well also points out many, many things that we can do based on the chat, which I'm going to get you to look at, Moira, while Serena is speaking. We won't have any problem with the Q&A section. There are some lively people on the call. I see Val Rack, Phyllis Bilia, a few others, so I don't think we'll have any problems. I'm hoping one day we can get, I'm going to ask you a question afterwards about changing the conversation and maybe embracing some of these adjectives that are used to describe women. I don't think there's anything wrong with being hardworking and detail-oriented. Anyway, so we'll get to a Q&A in a second. This next topic, our next speaker is Dr. Serena Sorab. And I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yes.
Yeah. And she is an assistant professor at the Faculty of Business and Information Technology at Ontario Tech University. And her work explores something very interesting, the organizational and institutional factors that facilitate women's advancement in organizations and society. And her new line of interdisciplinary research examines the intersection of infertility and women's careers. And I think I'm going to be listening to this with great interest. She's going to share some of the insights that she's uncovered about the impact of infertility on women's careers. So thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Sorab, and I'm going to hand it over to you if you want to share your screen.
Sure, my pleasure. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for the introduction, Suzanne. And let me just share my screen. And I'm very happy with the way the talks are structured. It's a pleasure to come after Moira and that amazing talk. And it was a very good way of looking at the kind of getting a comprehensive view of what is happening. And as Moira mentioned, we have come a long way, but unfortunately there is a lot to be done. And thankfully we are at the time, I fully agree that we are at the time when there is a will, there is a societal will to make the change happen. And this is, I'm very happy to be part of it. As Suzanne mentioned, this is a new field of work that I've started, and what I'm presenting is based on preliminary research that I'm doing with Dr. Basir at University of Waterloo. And to the best of our knowledge, no one has looked at the intersection of infertility on women's careers. And so this is we have spent the last 6 months writing grant after grant application to fund our research. And I hope this opens up the discussion around some of these issues. And so as I can imagine, what I'm sharing is the experience of many people in the audience. Women are working hard to, particularly to get the education that in academia, in medicine, in law, the long years of studying to get to the required education, and then that is followed by longer hours of working in this competitive fields. In academia, our field is known for having flexibility. And I once heard someone saying that it's an awesome job. You can pick which 18 hours of a day you want to work. And that's the reality of life for many of us. And as we are engaging in these activities, some women think about, well, maybe a baby, and for while some are courage women, and they just move on and they have the baby when their body is ready. Many don't, because they are worried about what it would mean and what it would do to their careers. The data that I'm presenting is about some of the research that is done on women in academia, but when we look at the broader picture, of course, there is more evidence on this. But for fields like academia and medicine, the need for the set stages are in a way that usually making up for the lost time in the long run is not possible. So if I'm underperforming in the early years of my career, there is a good chance that I will not be able to make up for that time. Women who don't perform well, or people who don't perform well, this can lead to low paying and insecure adjunct positions, employment at lower tiered institutions, and in some cases just being pushed out of academia because you weren't able to deliver the outcomes that were expected when you were doing your PhD or during your time as an assistant professor. Research shows that women who have children during their PhD studies are less likely to obtain tenure track positions. Similarly, those who they wait to get their first job and then they go for having a baby before the biological clock runs out, within the 5 years of their assistant professor position, they are less likely to get a tenure. So the cost of having a child early on is heavy. We know that there is a heavy cost for basically having motherhood ambitions before you make it to the level that is fairly secure, you're established. And we have come a very long way. We have succeeded in many professions in going up the ladders, jumping over one hurdle after the other. Women have broken grounds in many fields, including medicine, and we have shattered the glass ceiling here and there. The most recent one being Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris, and the joy it has brought for many of us who are active in this field to see finally a woman in a position at that level. But then the question is, what is the cost of postponed motherhood? And we are postponing motherhood for all these reasons, because we see other people paying the price, but we never talk about, okay, so what happens when you do postpone motherhood? And infertility is one of the major costs. Infertility is defined as the failure to achieve a clinical pregnancy after 12 months or more of regular unprotected sexual intercourse. And usually if you're above 35, the doctors take reduce 12 months to 6 months, and they kind of jump into the fertility treatments if you're not successful in 6 months. 1 in 6 Canadian couples seeks infertility treatment. So it's way more common than what we expected. And there's very little research on infertility in different professions, but recent research on women in medicine shows that the number is 1 in 4 for couples who are in medicine. And I expect the numbers to be fairly similar for other competitive fields and women in academia. And the reason is that when we are busy building our careers, our body is kind of losing interest in having a baby, and women's fertility declines very sharply as they age. We know that there is a magic number of 35, and then 40 is the next kind of magic point. So the fertility rate is high among female professionals, and we know that women in their 40s are now the only age group with a rising pregnancy rate. So what does fertility or infertility look like? For those of you who are not familiar, there is kind of a protocol of how infertility treatment happens. You are called in frequently once you get the day 1 of your menstruation. You go into a clinic early in the morning, usually around somewhere between 6:30 to 8 a.m. For blood work and ultrasound. And then there is a lot of medication, self-injections, and many procedures that someone would go through one after the other, with IVF usually being the last stage, but some couples take it to the stage of getting egg donors and surrogates, and many, many complications. And while the fertility, women are usually only the cause of infertility in 35% of the cases. So it's the research shows that roughly a third of cases are male or male-focused cause of infertility, 1/3 are female-focused, and 1/3 is a mix of both. So while it's only a third of cases that is directly related to the female body, because of the nature of our body, women end up being involved in most of the procedure in most cases. So they are taking basically they get heavily involved in the procedure. Regardless of the source of the infertility. And infertility is time consuming. It varies in scope and duration. For some people, they are lucky and in just a few months, they get the results that they want. But some go through the process for sometimes more than a decade. There is research showing that, like I have seen numbers up to 15 years of someone being involved in infertility treatments. And the other factor that needs to be taken into account is that as we age, not only we lose our fertility potential, but the effectiveness of fertility treatments declines. So the older someone gets, the less likely they are that the less likely it is that they spend a short time in the treatment and they get the success they need. So they end up spending longer years in the process. And so infertility is an all-encompassing experience. No one talks about it, but this is an experience that is highly related to depression in women, depressive symptoms, anxiety, stress, as you can imagine, mood swing, sleeplessness, insomnia is could be one of the side effects. And it takes a heavy toll on the relationship. So the woman is not the only person who is being affected. Outside Canada, the financial cost is a huge aspect of it. The overall experience takes a heavy toll on the relationship. And not surprisingly, the couples who go through unsuccessful infertility treatments are 3 times more likely to either divorce or end their cohabitation. So this is the experience that a woman should be ready to go through when she is delaying childbirth and delaying pregnancy. And the question is, okay, so you're going through this maybe for years, and what is the impact on a woman's career? And this is something that no one talks about. And so I'm just going to share a little bit of what we expect to happen and what we have learned through the preliminary research that we have done in this field. So the first element is that infertility is time consuming because of the frequent and unpredictable visits to the doctor, both for the morning visits that can happen multiple times in a month, and because they are and for the procedures that are needed to be done, sometimes women need to take time off depending on their health situation or their body after a certain procedure to increase the chance of success. And so this could require this may lead to frequent absences from work, and women have noted that infertility it can be a second job. Just the demands of managing all these kind of spontaneous visits to the doctor, and of course you have a certain clinic that you should go to. And the other aspect of it is that infertility, as I mentioned, it has a strong physical and psychological impact on a woman. It creates emotional distress, depression, and think about the experience of being rejected month after month after month. And imagine being in academia, where rejection and kind of growing a thicker skin when you are applying for grants and sending out your publications is part of our life. And being able to feel that there is hope, that's an element that is important when you are pursuing a career in academia. And we know from researching behavioral science that different elements of our life spill over into from one to the other. So for example, if I start feeling hopeful in one aspect of my life, that hope can spill over to my career and my intentions to, for example, send out another grant. And the other element is loss of control over one's life. You are in a process that completely puts you in a helpless position. There is nothing you can do a lot of times, and you just have to wait and hope for the best. And so this can have a temporary impact on a woman's performance in any field, and in academia and medicine in particular. And what makes this more complicated is that this is a silent fight. Rarely people talk about their infertility experience and what they are going through. This is partly because of the social stigma, because you may think that this is basically something that you are not able to accomplish. Some women experience identity threat because they are not able to deliver or fulfill what what a woman is supposed to be doing. But there is also another layer that makes this more complicated, and that's the fear of what knowledge about their infertility and their motherhood intention will do to their careers. Women are worried that they will be perceived as less committed if their employer learns about their infertility experience, and by association that they are thinking about getting pregnant and going on maternity leave, that they might be as a result excluded from growth opportunities, something that we know is happening to pregnant women, a phenomenon that is labeled as benevolent discrimination. So people are not looking to harm you, but they assume that, well, if she's pregnant, she's probably going to spend more time with her baby. And so women have that fear that if their fertility is disclosed, that could happen. And of course, becoming a target of what we know motherhood penalty and pregnancy discrimination in general, which is kind of a broader discussion for another session, hopefully. So with that, a woman is going through this experience in silence without getting any support from the organization, from the supervisor, from colleagues, and so women are holding back. But the problem is that this is basically the decline in their performance can also harm their careers. If my performance is declining without anyone knowing about what I'm going through, they would question my abilities, they would question my professional commitment. I remember a couple of years ago at one of the major conferences, a very promising PhD student decided to not attend the conference. She was scheduled for the conference, she was scheduled for the session that we were in, and she just sent an email to the other collaborators saying that she would like someone else to present for her. And this created havoc. And I knew that she was pregnant at the time. I knew that she was going through IVF. She had already gone through one failed IVF, but she didn't feel comfortable to share that with her, with other researchers, at the fear that They would judge her for having, I'm just speculating, but there could have been judgment that she's getting pregnant before having her tenure track job or any other speculations. And so that created a lot of discussion around, well, that is not professional. She shouldn't have done this. This is unacceptable, and so on. Thankfully, in that case, she let others know after the fact. And but this is just a simple experience of what do you do when you are going through this experience. You know that in the uncertainty of remaining pregnant is very very high, and women are kind of struggling between the decision of disclose or not disclose. And also research on concealable stigma tells us that when people try to conceal their chronic illness or stigmas such as their sexual orientation or other factors, that also impacts their relationship with their colleagues because they cannot appear authentically, and therefore they end up isolating from their work group. Their feeling of belonging to the work group declines. And we know that the ability to build relationships is one of the most important assets in professional development and career growth. And if you are living a double life and you cannot share what you're going through, and as a result, not able to build those meaningful relationships, that can have a longer term impact on your career. So what is the impact? Definitely a lot to be done here, but what we know is that women are going through what we call what is categorized as a chronic illness. Chronic illness are illnesses that last longer than 1 year, cause some limitations to what a person can do, and require ongoing medical care. This is infertility treatment. But infertility treatment is not, or infertility is not treated as or seen as a chronic illness. Women who go through infertility do not receive the same support that someone going through cancer receives. They do not receive any day off. And therefore, they are fighting this difficult treatment and this difficult disease as they pretend that everything is normal. And if you are in a high demand job like medicine, academia, that becomes kind of unimaginably difficult. So what can be done? There is, as I mentioned, there is very little talked about, discussed in this domain. Recently, I'm sure this will be interesting for many. Recently, this kind of commentary came out with a group of physicians who are talking about high rate of infertility among physicians. And one of the authors, Argawan Sales, has also written a piece at Times about her experience. I spent my fertile years training to be a surgeon. Now it might be too late for me to have a baby. So these physicians, the action they have taken is to raise awareness about infertility and create awareness among physicians about what it feels like to go through infertility and how small the chances are that you will actually become pregnant. But of course, there is a lot that needs to be done at the organizational levels, and providing, and there is a whole range. Moira shared very good practices that can be done, but no one has looked at how we can help women as they go through this important part of their life. But some of the factors could be around creating policies that make it that provide opportunities for women to go on a reduced load if they want, creating a culture that is accepting of discussion around infertility, and accepting that a woman who is going through infertility, the experience might be much more difficult than the experience of a woman going through pregnancy, and this could last for over the years, and thinking about how we can support them through this process. And this is, as I mentioned, early research we hope that we can expand this into interdisciplinary research and collaborate with people in medicine. So if you are interested in collaborating with us, please just send me an email. And that's it for me, Susan.
Oh my goodness. Thank you,
Mhm.
Dr. Mora. That was amazing in that. And what I might do to moderate this part of the session is I'm probably going to go back to Moira first and maybe ask her to comment a little bit on some of what you talked about, because a lot of what you talked about really gets at what Moira talked about in terms of, the ultimate in work-life integration, trans issues, not just of, there are issues of equity, wellness, but phrasing infertility as a chronic illness, I've not actually myself thought of that before, but anecdotally, I certainly understand the psychological and the actual frank mood disorders that I've observed in some of our colleagues who have faced issues of fertility. So Moira, maybe I'll ask you or invite you to comment a bit. And I know I'm probably like you, I'm sitting here thinking of all the things we should bring to the Department of Medicine executive in terms of support for, and it's not just women faculty. I think this was so useful and important. So Moira, maybe I'll invite you, and then I'm going to go through the chat a little bit and try and summarize some of the themes and ask questions that way, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to normalize the fact that reproduction happens in early career faculty, and it shouldn't come as a surprise to people that people get pregnant, try to get pregnant, have problems, and we should recognize that it happens. And I think that's the first step to working on potential solutions to it.
So if I go through the chat a little bit there, I think it does really resonate with a lot of people. There's a lot of discussion of personal stories and how many of us feel. I recently was at an event with trainees who are interested in women in academic medicine. And one of the issues many of our residents brought forward was the issue of how to reintegrate after pregnancy, but also I'm sure that the the journey of either becoming pregnant or facing infertility, there are multiple, there must be sort of substantive ways that we can support individuals going through this. Can you actually talk about any concrete examples, Serena, of programs that can support this, or is this really that there is nothing out there?
I don't think there is anything out there, and to the best of my knowledge, no one is talking about infertility. But the general theme that is emerging when we look at the issues, recent issues in terms of women advancement, revolves around open discussion with women. So first of all, recognizing that there is a lot of work done on work-life balance, but most of it is around people who have succeeded in the family planning journey. And but in terms of, for example, pregnancy, there is the recommendation that there shouldn't be an assumption that a woman is going to kind of stop working right after she delivers the baby, or that she is less committed because she's going to have a baby, and having a discussion with the woman around what she needs to do, and having a culture of, as Moira mentioned, recognition that we are human beings, and this is part of life. This is part of a natural life that many women and men want to pursue, and opening up that discussion around, okay, so what do you need, and how can we help you, and how can we support you? There is also research in other domains that shows that when organizational managers and leadership set the example by sharing, that goes a long way in creating the culture. For example, in terms of the paternity leave. There is research that shows when managers take paternity leave, the rate of paternity leave goes up in the organization. So that setting of example, the stigmatizing the conversation around infertility, those are some of the things that can be done.
So another question that's come up, it came up earlier in the chat, and I'm going to invite perhaps a chat that was had earlier by Phyllis Bilia, Val Rack, and I know it's an issue for many of us. When we talked about the gender pay gap, there is an issue, Moira, of how you negotiate for salaries, and that, I mean, I think this gets a little bit at some of the issues of informal networks and things like that, and perhaps lack of transparency. But there was a comment that women are perhaps, well, maybe I'll ask Phyllis or Val to raise. Val, you want to actually talk about that a little bit and phrase it perhaps as a question that we could get Moira's thoughts on? I'm not sure if she's still there. I'll give her a sec.
I mean, I can just comment on the whole negotiating for and the salary gap. You know, a few comments. There is some research showing that when standardized packages are implemented and standardized procedures, that the pay gap diminishes or is eliminated among academic faculty. So if you say, if you're coming on as an assistant professor with this job description, this is what you get, then you eliminate the pay gap. So that's something that organizations should certainly consider. And then, yeah, you're right. In terms of the actual negotiation, this is an area where mentorship is really important. And if women don't have mentors who can help them with this, maybe they should be assigned mentors to help them with the negotiation. Although, you know, it shouldn't be necessary. Like junior faculty are always going to be at a disadvantage when it comes to negotiating. I think more standardization would be helpful there.
I agree. I mean, I think standardization, transparency, which I think, you know, I think is improving certainly. But yeah, I do think that rather than learning how to do this, perhaps standardization and transparency would be the better way to go, so that we all know what the expectations are. I would certainly be in favor of that route myself. So there.
I think Phyllis and Val had problem to unmute themselves, and now they can talk.
Oh, okay, well, why don't we bring Val and Phyllis into the conversation? Any other points that about this topic? It certainly raised a lot of chatter.
I can speak about my own personal experiences. I think the problem also depends on your job description when you actually come on board from the university's perspective. And then, and I don't mean assistant professor, I mean clinician scientist versus clinician investigator and that part of it. So what I had to do was a little bit of digging into what would make me successful and where could I be most successful, because I struggled with which site I should be at, to be quite honest, thinking about where I wanted my research lab to be as opposed to where I wanted to do my clinical work. And it was clearly stated to me that the best place is where I'm currently am, because they could offer me a better package. So then what I did was I actually laid down the law, in essence, to say, if this is what I need in order to be successful. And then I just put it down on paper. I actually did not negotiate. I actually just said, this is what I need to start a lab with 5 or 6 people. This is the exact equipment I need. This is the exact starting funds that I need. And I was very lucky in the end that I actually didn't have to negotiate anything, but I put in what I needed for success. And then I came in with my own funding. I had a CHR grant, which is not always the case. So I was very lucky that way. But I knew that there is a lot of my senior colleagues in my division had said to me, be careful, you may be undersold or underpaid or undersupported. So knowing that maybe I was aggressive. I don't like using that word for a woman because it can be misconstrued, but I just kind of said, this is what I need. And I didn't have any problem with that. That's my own personal experience.
I think some of what you talked about, Phyllis, does get at the issue. I think towards the end, what you're really saying is you were mentored, though, to many in many ways in terms of this particular aspect of of a career and everyone's career. While I agree that standardization and transparency are important, it's true that everyone's careers are different and you do need to make your needs known, right? And that's where mentorship comes in that we can help, hopefully senior members can help you understand what your needs really are. So
Absolutely.
ask for the things that you think you need. I know the time is late, and I know myself, I have something to move on to at noon. So I think what I may do is quickly thank the speakers. Actually, you know what? I just wanted to raise one last point. I know in my own career, I've been affected by many of the things that Moira's discussed. And I'm hoping that a lot of this, I agree with both speakers that things have changed. They continue to change, and change takes hard work, basically. But I am hoping that we can change the conversation, because as Phyllis, you just mentioned this, I think that we all understand, and I think it's applied to me, that women are described in different terms than men. But I'd like to embrace some of those descriptions over time, right? I'm not sure that I want to, I know I've been described as nice and hardworking. Do I really think there's anything wrong with that? No, I don't. And I'm hoping we can change the conversation so those things are not associated with my deficiency as a deficiency for me, or something that limits my career. And what I am hopeful for is that that we will change to embrace something like that as a feature you might want in a leader. So I'm going to invite Serena and Moira for a last couple of comments, and then we'll close the session.
Yeah, I mean, we're out of time, but I'd say I really enjoyed the session. I see there's lots of interesting information in the chat. I know there are many people on this call who have lots of expertise, so I look forward to ongoing discussions.
And same here. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. I know during the pandemic, going on another Zoom call is not very fun. So we really appreciate your presence, and I hope we can continue the discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much to the organizers. Well attended and lots of discussion. So thanks again, and take care, everyone. Have a great day.